Hello, this is Beyond Belief Sobriety, a podcast that explores topics of interest to people who are interested in a secular path to recovery from addictions of all kinds. And today I have John Huey back from the DC group, the We Agnostics group in DC. And we're going to be talking about relapse and dealing with the shame and guilt that we often feel after a relapse and how to overcome that and move on in our recovery. So, very, very interesting topic and something that we haven't actually talked about on this podcast over the last 5 years that we've been doing this. So a good idea, John, to talk about this. Why don't you get the ball rolling, John? What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
the
well,
topic?
and, we were having a brief chat before we started. I did bring up the fact, some people watching this who know us or find out about us could say, well, what do these guys know about relapse? They've been, in my case, I've been sober since January 1987, which will be 35 years this January if I don't drink and don't drop dead between now and January. You've been sober a similar length of time. So chronologically speaking, since we haven't had a drink or had a relapse, we're sort of removed from it in terms of time, and I thought about that. When I raised this topic with you, I said, well, what is at this point in time, what is my credibility in terms of discussing this? And when I thought about it, I looked at my own history, I saw that, well, indeed, I had a lot of history with relapse. And I won't go into, because we've only got so much time, I won't go into the whole drunkalogue part of it, but there was an incident when I was 25 years old where I woke up out of a blackout after having a horrible argument with the woman that subsequently became my first wife a couple years later. And I was pouring my entire bar. I had no money. I lived in a shitty place on Connecticut Avenue. The reason I had the apartment was that it was about a block from my favorite bar. That was its primary attraction to me. And the only thing I had in there other than my books that were worth anything was a bar. And, I came out of a blackout pouring, hundreds of dollars, which was a lot of money at that time, down the drain. And as I was coming out of the blackout, I'm 25 years old. And I told myself over and over and over again, as I was coming out of the blackout, I heard myself saying, you have to stop, you have to stop, you have to stop. And there's if there's an abiding mystery in my life, there is, as has been well established, absolutely no hocus pocus in my life, but there is mystery. There are a lot of human mysteries. And one of the greatest human mysteries to me is how someone like myself, who was perfectly cognizant and totally aware that I absolutely had to stop, keep drinking from age 25, when that awareness really crystallized. It was very vivid, very real realization in my head that I had to stop. And I drank another 13 years.
Wow. Yeah.
How the hell did that happen? So as I reviewed that, I have to look at those 13 years in many respects as one continuous slip. So, continuing to, produce behavior and results that were almost heroically negative at times, sort of in defiance of my background in education, and defiance of everything in a lot of ways, and repeating that behavior over and over and over again. And most particularly, what happened to me, which I have related in other contexts, and I'll try to be brief about that, but it is the moment that took me to my moment of decision, or the moments that took me. And that's one of the things, I asked you if it was egotistical to quote yourself, and you assured me
No, it's not.
not. So I will, I'll take that risk, although some of my friends in Canada and elsewhere may have different opinions about that. But some of my admirers up there. But, But basically, uh, uh, what I had to do was I had to stop at one point physically. A doctor scared me in the spring of 1985. And I won't go into all the details, but he sufficiently terrified me that I actually quit. And, I had been thrown out of between my first and second marriage. I was living with this lady and she had thrown me out of her house. And I was living back down at DuPont Circle in a very nice place because I somehow managed to get and keep a very nice job during all this. And I was just sitting there, just drinking myself to death, basically, and somehow or another crawling into the office every day. Still don't know how I did that. But I quit for 9 months. And one night when I was out to dinner with this very same lady, by the way, there's another story there that we may have. That's maybe another podcast topic about enabling and stuff. But this very nice lady who had thrown me out of her place for an excessive devotion to Jack Daniels, not a year before, she's out to dinner with me. And she suggested we split, as she put it. She's a British lady. She had a lovely way of putting it. She said, a lovely bottle of wine. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I split that lovely bottle of wine with her. And unlike her, who went home and forgot about it, I just started drinking again. And that period of time from the fall of 1985 until the end of 1986, I lived in hell during those year and a half. Okay. So in fact, and in truth, I know what a slip will do to you because a slip almost killed me.
Right.
So there's my qualification and bona fides in terms of talking about slips. The fact that I haven't had one since I quit doesn't mean that I don't incorporate and understand and I still live with some of the consequences of that to this day. I believe that some physical things going on with me now in my early 70s may be connected. Who knows? We all have to live with our consequences. And I had to live with that. And, in thinking about this mystery, as you know, and you quite nicely reprinted my 5 articles about a secular recovery, which are sort of popular in some quarters. And there's the first article in that series is called The Secular Alcoholic and the Moment of Decision. And here's where I'll stick my neck out and quote myself. It's toward the beginning of that article, I say something like, I didn't say something like this, I said this. The longer I'm sober in secular recovery, the more mysterious the process, particularly for the atheist, becomes. By mysterious, I obviously do not mean anything that might be possibly construed as coming from the so-called spiritual realm, the topic of our next podcast. What I'm talking about are the all too human attributes of guilt, shame, self-loathing, and disgust that bring us literally, and this is the ironic part, in quotes, on our knees sometimes, to our first hours as sober women and men. And, I would say that it's not universal. And there are a lot of people with a lot of different types of stories. But in my case, all of those elements of guilt, shame, self-loathing, and disgust were most certainly present in me as I was either deciding to stop drinking or kill myself, which was basically the decision I felt I had at the end of my drinking in those last weeks of 1986, so long ago, lifetime ago for many people. So I know all about those feelings because I had them. But it strikes me and has struck me in all these years of dealing with this conventional program. And I went to many, many hundreds of conventional meetings, as you know, before. And as I've said many times, I was very lucky here in DC to have our secular meeting that started in 1988. That's really what saved my ass. But I did continue to go to conventional meetings for a lot of years. And even in the context of secular recovery, I hear a lot about guilt, shame, contrition, and all of those other things. And my opinion is that all of that stuff is what I needed to leave behind when I got sober. I didn't need any more guilt. I didn't need any more shame. I certainly didn't need to go run around apologizing to a bunch of people. I know that will get some of them out there all in a wad, because that incorporates guilt, shame, and contrition, doesn't it? Running around the world apologizing to people all day long. Fuck that. I wasn't going to do that. What I was going to do was try to clean up my life so that I didn't repeat some of those grievous errors.
And that's really the best thing that same thing here. This exact same thing here was the best thing that I could have done. In fact, it's this is a topic for another podcast, maybe, or I think we've probably talked about it before, but there's a real danger in making amends, that you don't necessarily have a right to bring up a lot of crap like that with people.
Like all these other things, the ones that say that it did something for them, let them go ahead and do it. I'm not going to tell them they shouldn't have done it or it wasn't good for them or whatever. Their self-reported experience is just as valid as mine is.
Sure.
In many respects. But I'm just talking from a purely atheist, maybe reductivist, certainly dialectical materialist point of view, which I do have, that all of that business of shame, guilt, and contrition is not useful to me. And I see, once again, when we go back to our wonderful Facebook group, which has had some interesting stuff in it recently about other topics, but all too often I see people coming into the program with this full weight, this sort of sword hanging over their head from the past.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anybody any good at all. And many people report, I haven't had this since entering the program, I haven't had to report this, but many people I've heard over the years report that it's those things that contributed to them picking up and going out and doing what they do. Okay. Now, how did I break the cycle myself? Okay. I came to that moment of decision that I talk about all the time, like a broken record. Okay. And I'll just read the one more thing from that Secular Alcoholic and the Moment of Decision article that frames that a little bit. And I'll read this paragraph and then I'll put this aside. It appears to me that in many success stories in the program, there is a shock of recognition, a point in time that I will call the moment of decision. In an instant, internal circumstances combined with illness and necessity to force a commitment to quit drinking that comes from within and has little to do with outside forces and pressures that, while possibly dragging us to the edge, are not the things that prove decisive in a true start on a life without alcohol and drugs. All right? Once we've decided, we have to decide. And nothing, or at least for some, nothing pulls you back to the edge like this guilt, shame, contrition, all of that stuff. Now, why is all that stuff there? Now, I'm not an orange papers guy, as you know. I don't spend my life writing anti-AA screeds. I'm a member of a couple of specialized Facebook groups about, AA apostates and stuff like that. I don't contribute to those groups, but I sort of look at them from time to time. So I'm not going to go about this bashing thing. But I do know that a lot of what this stuff in this so-called program is all about is about passive-aggressive control, gaslighting, and in many cases, the egotism of people who are trying to control others. So my suggestion is is that there are people around us, and I would posit even in the secular world, that might want to passively, aggressively control us by signing up to something like this 12-step thing, which they call secular, but really isn't. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with you because I know you have a disagreements with
Yeah.
talk about that. But the facts were the facts. Now I've got more than enough egotism of my own. So I know an egomaniac when I see one, because I can look in the mirrors at some point and see those traits come out in myself. But I'm certainly not going to subject myself to some egotistical guru who's framing my life for me in terms of guilt, shame, and contrition.
Right.
That's not the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that for sure that guilt and shame are to just kind of go with addiction and alcoholism. I mean, you can't help but feel, and everyone's life circumstances are different, but I know for myself personally, every time they threw me in a jail cell for whatever period of time, I wasn't really feeling so proud of myself, and there was a lot of guilt and shame to that. And there was a lot of shame surrounding how I would make promises to myself not to do that, not to get drunk and arrested and everything, and again keep doing it. So there was quite a bit of that. It didn't do me any good, except for, like you said, it maybe eventually got me to the point where I was able to make a decision to do something with getting sober and not drinking and getting help.
Right. There are arbiters of reality out there that stop people who are truly guilty. Okay,
Right.
They're called sheriff's offices and FBI agents and federal state prosecutors. And if you get too far off the grid and that happens to you, that's a whole other thing. Okay.
Right.
Now, that never happened to me, but I know we all, of course, run across people where that even happened.
Oh them. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I know you and I have both heard every possible horror story you can imagine of people, going to prison because they killed somebody while they were driving or whatever. There's a lot of different things that a person could carry with them.
I'm talking about this internalization thing. There's this buzzword that's used out there a lot these days in other contexts called gaslighting, right? Which people are constantly going on and on about being gaslit. But, there are people out there that'll tell you stuff that isn't necessarily true about you. All right. And you're the one that has to make that you have to sort those details out for yourself. Because there is an underlying problem, again, in my opinion, in alcoholics and addicts that's very serious. Because And it goes back to my own issues and my own problem, where on some level, awareness of my condition was not enough.
Right.
It didn't stop me for all of those years. Somehow, and that's the mystery part, there was this internalized dire necessity that took me to the end of my drinking. And I'm not going to let anything or anyone take me back there. Now, that comes around to yet another thing. I'm not trying to suggest that all these forces regarding relapse are external, because a lot of it it's internal.
Oh yeah, just part of the deal, part of the disease of alcoholism. You might relapse.
Right. And one of the great challenges for me in my old age is trying to figure out how to be useful. I have younger people approach me from time to time with questions or whatever. I don't hold myself out as a sponsor for anyone, but I do get asked for my opinion from time to time. And, mostly what I say and what I see when people are bringing all that baggage to us is that in the end, it's that internal awareness of their condition that's going to see them through. That is the internal. It's different from that awareness I had when I was 25,
Right.
when I was in denial about it and didn't do anything about it. It's the awareness I had when I was 38 and had finally had enough.
Yeah.
And why are we being drugged back to all this crap about micromanaging and examining our behavior in these tiny little increments that you see people going through on the Facebook pages and reporting back from these awful conventional meetings they go to, where it's implied that you have to micromanage every moment of your life.
Yeah, I don't
Because
know. It's, you know, I don't care what organization you're going to participate in, whether it's Smart Recovery or the Toastmasters Club or whatever. You're always going to have individuals in any organization that is going to, um, uh, somehow put forth their personality and their view on things, and and cause trouble, and tell you things that are not true. And it gets even more complicated when you're dealing with something like substance abuse,
well,
where there are genuine feelings of guilt and shame, depression, despair
right.
that we feel when we get in here.
It's so important for newcomers.
Yeah.
All right. And for even people our age, that can get ourselves into a corner from time to time. And, slipping is not to be fucked with. Okay. It's really, really serious. I know that my last slip almost took me out of this world, and I'll do anything within reason internally to avoid another one. But I'm not going to be controlled by some outside force or some outside personality in order to do so. I have to figure out internal mechanisms that work for me. Because here's the thing, slips are reinforcing.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I've had to deal with a couple people in recent years who are dead, all right, now, who kill themselves with alcohol. And there are some alcoholics and addicts who get to a tipping point, where return is virtually impossible. I know we're always supposed to say that, oh, nothing's impossible, you can always come back, and da 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 da. But I have seen in real time, in vivid, all too vivid, very unfortunate detail, that some people get to a certain point and they're only going out one way.
Right. Yeah, it's very serious. You absolutely, I've known people more than I care to recount who have died from relapses, and it absolutely happens. So,
okay. And people do crazy things,
yeah.
like, remain unvaccinated and go to Missouri.
Right, right. But there's all kinds, yeah.
They do crazy stuff,
Yeah. So, I guess that what I was thinking about, I don't care if it's AA and the 12 steps or Smart Recovery and their principles and what they do, or Life Ring or whatever. People will relapse, and with that comes regret and shame, and I mean that just happens. But I think it's just important to understand that those are internalized feelings that you can actually use to inspire you to move on with your recovery.
Right.
That your recovery can continue, and
right.
Here's the thing, okay, and I'll put it in the context of AA. Here's the danger. You relapse. You come back to a meeting, you feel like shit, you tell everybody you're shit, you tell everybody you're not working the steps right, and then there's some asshole over there that agrees with you. That's what's really dangerous.
Well,
and I've seen that.
I have a friend who I've known since the late 1980s.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not going to identify by gender or meeting or anything like that. But this is somebody I've known who's now older than I am. And this person has not had more than 6 months of continuous sobriety in all that time. I know for a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while, I see this person. And the only thing I've learned how to say to someone in this situation is, I'm so glad to see you. I can't say much more than that.
Right.
Because I am glad to see this person.
Right, right. And you don't, I think the best thing to do with someone who relapses is just give them the space to talk about it when they want to talk about it, how they want to talk about it, all that.
Even when it is a seemingly hopeless case, there are people that have recovered even at very late in life.
Sure.
One of my
I've seen some cases that you would never thought the person would ever live through, and eventually went on to have some long-term sobriety. But that's the thing that I think that if there's anything I would want to be able to help somebody with, is if when I see someone come back from a relapse, if they're overly down on themselves and they think that they screwed everything up and they have to start all over their recovery from square one. Recovery is a long-term process. It's a process of change that goes on, and you learn from your ups and your downs. And if you're alive at a meeting that day after a relapse, you're in a good place. And eventually all those feelings of shame and despair and guilt will go away. But there is a danger, and I agree, and I know what you're saying. I mean, when it comes to the 12 steps, if you're in a circle of people who are going to blame your relapse because you are somehow defective, you didn't do the steps properly, you weren't honest enough, all this other kind of crap. And I know that happens. That's really dangerous, because that's not going to do the person any good. And I just think that the best thing to do is just to be there in that person's corner to support them in whatever their goals are in their recovery, and just to give them the space to talk about what they want to talk about when they want to talk about it. And a lot of the stuff too, if you can afford it, if you can get some sort of professional help, sometimes that's the best place to deal with that kind of stuff, for sure. Not an AA.
Yeah. I mean, in my own case, I know that since I got sober, I haven't had what even could approach to be a clinical depression ever since I got sober. I was chronically depressed in my last year and a half of drinking.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, physiologically, when I took the alcohol away, the depression went away.
Yep.
But if you take the alcohol away and the depression's still there, it's something else.
Yep.
And we can't, we all know we can't. I'm sure the one thing about the secular community, I've never heard anybody tell anybody to stop taking their medication or not go to a therapist or not take a scientific approach to a clinically diagnosed medical problem. Right. We don't do that. I've never heard it. May have happened, but I've never seen it in the years I've been around. So that's a good thing. We don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But even in this secular thing with these books and all this, I was going to say crap, but some of my author friends will take umbrage if I say it's crap. Okay. All this stuff, these how-tos, and this way and that way, and how do you do it, and all of that other shit. I could easily write a how-to book. I'm never going to do it.
Right.
I'm trying to get my next poetry books published. I'm not going to write a book about this.
Right.
Because it's not a book. It's a set of very simple ideas.
Yeah.
It doesn't have anything to do with the book.
Yeah. The last thing I think that a person needs when they relapse is any sort of criticism because they didn't follow some sort of a rigid program just the right way. That's the worst thing. The best thing that person can get is some support from people who will genuinely support them and not try to beat them down further. The guilt that others put on you or try to put on you is what's so damaging and unhelpful. And that's something that, we can defend against. Nobody has a right to make you feel, you know what I'm saying? And people will do that. I don't know why, but sick bastards will do that.
Well, if you go back to the moment that you decided to stop, and internally, not externally, figure out how to reinforce that moment and what brought you to that moment over and over and over again, there couldn't be, for me at least, a simpler way to stay sober.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I walked down the streets all those years in downtown Washington, whenever I was in town in the old days, I'd walk down M Street in a suit in this weather, in 90-degree weather.
Mm-hmm.
We were nuts in those days, but about how we dressed and stuff. But it certainly wasn't for comfort. But I went through all that discomfort every day I was in town to hear people tell me how their lives had improved as a result of abstinence.
Mm-hmm.
Not how their lives had improved because they bought some fucking book.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, my life improved when I read books. It's just that I had to read thousands of them
Mm-hmm.
for my life to really improve. Okay. So I know books improve people's life because my whole life and career has been based on reading.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But no one book has ever taken over my effing or directed my effing life.
Right.
But what did have efficacy was this idea that abstinence is combined with that decision would take me wherever I needed to go. And when I see somebody in desperate trouble, and I just had someone contact me recently who appears to be in pretty desperate trouble, I can't, and I'll talk to this person some more, but I don't really have a lot of quote unquote wisdom to impart, but I do have a couple of core, I hate to use the word belief because people will misconstrue that. I do have a couple of core principles that I know worked for me and that I have a feeling may work for others if they incorporate those core principles into the internal structure of who and what they are. But going into this thing where you feel you have to go into a meeting and beat your breast and say, I'm so sorry, I fucked up again. I'm such a bad,
you totally don't have to do that.
Awful piece of shit. I mean, I hear it in our meeting.
I know.
Okay.
I hear it too. It happens. But the what people should understand is they don't have to do that. You do what you're comfortable with doing. What I hate, I don't know if you've ever been to meetings like this. I'm sure you have. This is what I absolutely can't stand at meetings. Who is here for the first time since their last relapse? I hate that. Don't say that. If somebody wants to talk about being back from a relapse, they'll talk about it. But to put that out there in the environment where everybody's quiet, wait, oh my God, who's here for the first time? That's awful.
Right.
Just leave that alone. Leave it up to the people to decide, and then give them the freedom to talk about it or not talk about it.
Yeah. And I'm sort of remiss because I don't speak up when I hear, like at the time when chips are being given out.
Yeah.
Who would like a 24-hour chip or the desire for
right.
I mean, who's a fuck up? Okay.
Right. Basically, I know. I hate that. I hate it.
Token,
I hate it too.
Basically, that's and if you're a real fuck up, you'll get a lot of those tokens.
Yeah.
So
the problem with that too is, so relapses can happen, and as you said, they are very dangerous. You do not want to have one, but they will happen. But the thing is to somehow find a way to turn that into a stepping stone towards your progress and not get trapped into some sort of a revolving door where it's relapse, come back and do your penance, get your white chip, relapse. It can be that.
Right. Well, the horror, for anybody that's listening and thinking about this relapse stuff, I can say from my own experience and long observation, the older you are, the worse the relapses get. We don't do well as we age and continue to fuck up and I said fuck up, but and on one level, but a lot of people don't do well as they age and this substance takes over more and more and more of their life and their health.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, it's really sad.
Yeah.
And, even I've seen it in recent years. I've had a couple very sad instances of people we've lost. And I said a long time ago that I wasn't going to let alcoholics break my heart anymore. But they still do on some level, on some visceral level. And every time it happens, and it happens all too often for my liking, I have to say something like, if only he'd taken or she'd taken one step back and looked a little bit longer at what had been good for them in the past and focused on that. But it's not that simple. That's the other part, the mystery part.
Yeah.
How am I going to get that? How are we going to get that across? And, that's why all the scientists and everybody will hear about it at our convention here in October from some of the scientists looking for the magic elixir or the magic moment or the magic bullet, which I tend to doubt.
I think too that people try to understand something that is just pure insanity, and there's no rationalization about it. There's no rational reason why we would drink again, but we do. The closest that I came to relapse, John, I was sober for 2 years, and for whatever reason, I thought I was going to get a bottle of apricot brandy, put it in a coat pocket in my closet, and keep it there so that it would be there when I needed it. I went so far as to actually go into the liquor store to get that bottle and then tore out of there. I don't know why I would have done that. There was nothing going on with me really other than normal life stuff, but that's where I was nonetheless. I could have very easily have gotten that bottle. I could have very easily have relapsed. And I don't know if there'd been ever any explanation for it, other than I was apparently on shaky ground. I'm glad that I didn't relapse. If I would have relapsed, I would hope, I know that I would have felt bad about myself. I would have felt bad and guilty and all that kind of crap, but I would hope that I would have gone back to the meeting and been supported by my friends and been able to move on and learn from that. As it happens, I learned from the experience anyway, because I know the state of mind of being in relapse. I know the state of mind. And so I've got a lesson learned that I can share with people as an experience. I was very lucky that I just didn't drink. I was very, very, very lucky.
Well, this mystery can strike you anywhere you are in life.
Yeah.
Living here in Washington all these years, I've either known or been associated with people who are associated with it. Alcoholics at the very pinnacle of power in life who pissed it all away.
That's right.
Right.
And
it's just a more expensive bar wearing more expensive clothes.
Yeah.
I learned that long ago. That this doesn't respect there's nothing you can have, okay, that will save you if you can't get straight, if you really are doing this to yourself.
But you see what I say, where it's something that's so insane to do that there's no rationalizing it.
There's no rationalizing.
There isn't. So it's like, you can't say, oh, this person didn't do this step right, or this person did, who knows what happened.
It's so far beyond normal human experience.
It is.
And it's so far beyond any kind of rational constructs that I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
That how could I possibly apply negative terms to people so afflicted?
You can't.
How could I do that?
I liken it to, and I have mental illness in my family. I have a brother who's schizoaffective, and his behavior is completely irrational, and I don't try to understand it because I can't. You can't say he acts this way because he had a bad day or he didn't do this right or didn't do that right. No. It's just it's a physical
Well,
chemical condition.
yeah, I don't know your brother, but I do know that science doesn't understand his brain chemistry well enough yet to be truly effective in terms of dealing with his issues.
Right.
Science does not know the brain chemistry of alcoholics and addicts well enough yet to be able to be truly effective in the way that our
Right.
wonderful, for
No.
example, our wonderful vaccines are.
So, getting to the topic of this podcast episode, when we're talking about dealing with the guilt and shame associated with a relapse, well, I think that it would be good for everybody to understand, even the person who relapsed, to just to be aware that there is no explanation for what happened. There is nothing that you did wrong that caused that to happen. So the feelings that you have are nothing but just that, and they will pass. But
Right,
just
exactly.
move on, move on with your life, and learn from the experience. The lessons will come eventually.
Yeah, and you can be adjudicated guilty
Yeah,
or adjudicated responsible in a court of law.
yeah,
These recovery chat rooms, and our friend in Texas calls them echo chambers. These recovery places and rooms and meetings are not definitive fact finding outfits.
right.
They don't know enough about you to put their finger on you, and they have no right to
No.
do
There
so.
will always be some stupid ass that's going to say, "Oh, you relapsed because of this or that." I have seen it so many times. Those people don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Well,
Don't even listen to them.
if you would only read my book and follow every instruction, then you wouldn't do this again.
Yeah.
And then they go out and do it again. All right.
Yeah.
So
And
how are we going to
and that
deal with
just
it?
that just compounds the guilt that people feel when they do relapse. So it is very dangerous. I've seen it. I've seen it so many times. It makes me sick. And I'm a person who's not opposed to the 12 steps, but I do think they should come with a warning label, and a caution, as should a lot of things in our recovery. But yeah, it's very tricky stuff.
Well, I'm an atheist, unalterably opposed to the 12 steps.
Mhm, mhm.
But we're not going to we need to get it. We need to do that on a stage somewhere.
Well, yeah,
It would be fun for some.
yeah,
You know,
and the thing about that too, we maybe someday we should just have that conversation, because you could talk about the steps as written, or you can talk about them as you yourself have experienced them.
well, I just call me literal minded,
Hmm.
but I take them at their word. I
Okay.
take them for what they say. I don't interpret what they say. I take what they say literally.
Okay, and I
And what
understand
they say
them. I
literally,
understand them as experiential. So it was
yeah,
just the
well, they're not
experience
my
of.
experience.
No, they
They have
aren't.
nothing
Not
to
my
do with my
experience either. But I see them as words written at a certain place and time
well,
by certain people. Anyway,
yeah, if we go down that rabbit hole, we'll ruin a
yeah,
perfectly
I
nice
guess so.
podcast.
But I could. I mean, even the things that you talk about, But anyway, I'm done with all that kind of crap too. To be honest with you, I don't have to put a number on anything that I have done in my recovery or any of my experiences. I
Well,
don't have to attach a step to it. I don't have to think that I did that at one time, as you know, for many, many years. It's not so important to me now.
well, people like to measure things, and I really do wonder about these measurement tools. I mean, I've got this 34-year thing sitting, which I still keep. Why do I keep
Yeah.
this program 34-year chip on my desk? Okay, and I change it once a year for another one, which fortunately they've always gone up and
Yeah.
not gone down. But you know, even Mr. Rational here likes his little token of of progress, but we shouldn't turn it into a totem,
Mm-mm.
particularly for people that are just starting this. Because somebody's going to look at an old gray-haired mother like me and say, "Oh shit, I can never do that. What's with him? He doesn't. What does he have to do with me? I'm 30 years old. My life's in a mess. What does this
Yeah.
person sitting in Bethesda, Maryland, of all places, have to do with me?" Which is what most of America says about us pointy-headed liberals here. But that's another story.
Yeah.
But it's like it's maddening sometimes because I have an article of faith that it really is exquisitely simple, but incredibly complicated to impart that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very strongly that one of the greatest challenge of this secular program, whatever we want to call it, once we get over our obsession with all this AA shit, which again is yet another topic for another time. But I'm constantly am on and on about how destructive and wasteful our discussion of AA in any way is. We did that recently, but when we boil it all down, right? How do we actually impart the simplicity of what works for us? I mean, I've got a group of people in Washington now. We're all getting old. And, one of them is 81 and just had his 41st birthday, AA or recovery, I shouldn't say AA, recovery anniversary. And I look at his life and I look at a lot of the other people I know with long-term recovery. And even though our lives are extremely different, the life circumstances are different, the backgrounds are different, our daily activities are very different. It seems to me very, very often when I'm talking to people about what they're doing to recover and stay recovered today, it's incredibly simple. They're just showing up.
Yeah.
Basically, it's not a philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, simple. I'm going to talk at the convention about philosophy a little bit. I'm going to have a session on atheism as it relates to recovery, how my core beliefs have helped drive me as a person forward in this whole thing. But, even I do have a couple of Christian friends left from my early days. And, my, very unusual people that I know from alternative lifestyle communities that I knew in the 60s that are sober now. And, others I know from the world of business and politics that are all these people totally, completely different, but sober for a long, long time. And, it's not a magic elixir, but it seems to me that the simplicity of it is really one of the hallmarks, is something that can be pointed to, rather than, oh, I went to this book and did this book every day, or I got up every morning and did my Zen meditation, or I did this, or I did that. Okay? So it's a construct, right? But how do we frame it? How do we get it across? How do we really convince people that guilt, shame, and contrition will not do it for them? Because I think there are a lot of things. Recovery is a wonderful thing, but there are things within the recovery community which I believe retard people's progress, hold them back, and for some are inimical to their happiness.
Yeah.
Which is what this topic is all about. Why do we do things that could negatively impact our happiness once we've done one incredibly positive thing that, while not guaranteeing us whatever happiness is, but certainly abstinence virtually guarantees you a more normal life, right?
Yeah.
And ergo, a more productive life, which could lead to a happier life.
Yeah.
And we're just constantly sort of, I'm almost of an opinion that whenever anybody talks about this step 4 and all of this other shit, contrition, and, oh, you're a newcomer, here's a chip because you're a fuck up and you're a one-dayer and all of these other things, right? Instead of coming up with a simpler set of constructs, I'm almost of the opinion that those things are dragging people down, not as much as, but are a contributing factor to these relapses that we see. Most relapses, I believe, are directly connected with people's lack of making a full and proper decision about their drinking. But the rest of this stuff can be used as either an excuse or some sort of internal incentive to go back to the former behavior.
Yeah, it's the main thing is people like you and me who have been around for a long time and have half of our wits about us maybe really do need to look out after the new person in the room who might be getting taken advantage of, somebody who might be putting these kinds of thoughts in their minds, because the problem is that for a lot of people who are just struggling with getting sober, they're in a really vulnerable time in their life and they are very ready for someone to tell them what to do. And there are plenty of people out there that will be glad to tell them and help them do that. So
yeah, and there are people of that mindset that do that, and you
know what, I've seen it happen even in a secular meeting before, and I just said, okay, I just, if I ever see that happen again, I think I'm gonna go to that new person, hey, listen, watch out. Beware, beware of the person who says that they're going to help you. Just be very, very, very careful about that.
If you get to a moment where a drink is imminent.
Yeah.
And I haven't been to a moment where I got to that moment just before our secular meeting was formed in the summer of '88. I came close to going to a downtown bar and getting loaded once when I was about a little less than 18 months sober. But somehow or another, I took a deep breath and knew that instead of walking to the circle to go to this bar, if I walked in the other direction down to a 5:30 p.m. meeting, I would find a group of people that at least had the intention not to drink today.
Yeah.
And that was enough for me in that particular situation.
Yeah.
But it was part of a recommitment to that decision I made at the beginning.
Oh yeah, that was me probably every single day for the first 30 or 60 days that I was sober, is going to meetings or drink, and I went to meetings.
Right.
And then calling someone too. It's really important just having a network of people who support you, and it's not easy to do that early on, but there's good people out there, and it's just meeting those people and having them in your corners. That's what saved my butt.
You have to find a peer group, a support group that's relevant to you.
Yes.
I was lucky because I knew a group of people here in DC who had sort of disappeared from the bar scene.
Yep.
Who I later found in the program.
I consider myself lucky for the same reason. I had people that we were all guys. We were all in our 20s or late 20s, early 30s, and we were all getting sober, and we were single. I mean, it was just perfect. We all had that in common. And, when we hung out together as friends, and that's I'm convinced that is what in the early days really helped me.
Yeah. Well, I had a program friend who, unfortunately, she passed away prematurely. She was a cigarette smoker, and that killed her. Mm. But she subsequently she was an old girlfriend of mine from the 70s, from the bar scene. Mm. And we used to have all kinds of fun whenever we ran into each other. And I ran into her on the stairs at a meeting one day. Mm-hmm. And just seeing her there and seeing her just sort of smile at me and nod her head and understand why I was there was important.
Yeah.
I mean, this lady subsequently got married to someone and became a part of a women's group that my second wife was a part of. Mm-hmm. And we ended up, when our kids were small, ended up socializing and stuff. So it's a kind of an ironic way to, sort of end up that relationship. And unfortunately, she did pass away from this cigarette thing she had. Mm. But she didn't pass away from drinking.
Yeah.
Her children weren't crying about that. They were crying for sure when she passed, but it was not about that.
Yeah.
So, now it's pretty simple. I mean, I do have external forces that hold me back from the edge if I wanted to think about them. But I don't need to use them, my daughters and my wife, as a lever. They certainly would be if I went down that road. But, the real lever for me is understanding at long last how important that decision was to me so many years ago. And also how important it was for me to reject all these suggestions that I be ashamed or guilty or contrite or apologize or all of that other horse shit, which I, unlike you, categorically reject. That was important for me as well.
Well, to be clear on that, I reject all those things you just said. I don't see things that way. I just don't see it that way. So, in other words, I'm not apologizing to anybody. I'm not feeling contrite.
All right. You like the New Testament?
No, I'm resolving relationships.
Look at John. I dressed for you today in my clerical garb.
Yeah.
This is not for the ones that think I'm satanic. This is not my black mass garb. This is my Rome garb.
Okay. Wow.
Ironic.
Well, I don't know if we solved anything or not. I think it was an interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah,
there are so many things we could talk about. I mean, if we ever wanted to get into a debate, but the thing is, I am not the step person that I was as of old. I'm pretty much a take it or leave it. I don't think that they're damaging like you do, but I'm not a promoter of them either. You know what I'm saying?
Well, so I think we're probably too old for either one of us to have a conversion experience.
No.
So,
well, I don't know about that. I've changed quite a bit. I've changed a lot. You've probably seen me change a lot in the last 5 years.
Well, yeah, I saw you develop into sort of a broadcaster, which is very, not sort of a broadcaster, you are a broadcaster. I mean, you can put up with all kinds of people, including unlikely characters such as myself.
I enjoy it.
But here we go. Once again, on the one hand, we're sort of on a treadmill with our newcomers and our younger friends who may be listening, because they say, well, what are these guys talking about in the end? It all sounds rather circular to me. And my answer would be that it is mysterious and it is circular, because if you're doing this constant, recommitment to a decision you made, that is something you're going round and round with over again. But it's not something that has to obsess you or take over your life. It's just something at your root that you have to be cognizant of.
Yeah.
Because once you're not cognizant of it, then some of these my friends in Russia, you know what they call the people that die of alcoholism in Russia?
Mm-mm.
What they say about when I lived there, it was like, and I should do a podcast on Russian alcoholism someday, but as an observer. But they always call it an accident.
Mm.
He or she had an accident. They use the Russian word for accident. It's not an accident. It's something we choose to do. But at the same time, it's not something we're guilty for.
That's interesting. They would call it an accident.
That's what they call it.
Interesting.
They called Chernobyl an accident.
Yeah.
Okay. It was anything but, if you look at that wonderful film about it, which I highly recommend.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to be said. I don't know if we helped, as I say, John, if we helped even one person with this ramble,
Oh, we
today
have.
we're successful.
You'll find just like always there will be many people that will talk about how much they enjoyed and were helped by the conversation. Then you'll have another group of people that absolutely couldn't stand it. So we'll
Oh,
have
right. Well,
both.
I do have my fan club out there. You see them rear their
Yeah,
beautiful,
yes, and you have your
generally
detractors as
elderly
well.
head from time to time, trying to catch me up short in some sort of ridiculous inconsistency of some sort
Yeah.
or another.
All
Well,
right.
what
Well,
I say to them. But I'm going to end this on a sweet and lovely note
okay.
that, we wish our friends nothing but success as they go about reaffirming their decision not to drink. That's a good way of it.
That's a very good way to end it. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you being here and talking to me and our listeners. It was great. And
Peace.
peace to you too. Take care. Bye bye.
Peace.